Welcome. In this video, I'm going to briefly introduce mediational analysis. It's a way to understand mechanisms, to understand how effects that we observe actually come about. So, what does it mean to understand mechanisms? Well, we've looked at linear regression, and that allows us to say whether one variable predicts another. So we can show that taking part in some kind of intervention leads to higher happiness. The next step that we might want to take is we might want to explore moderation. We might want to explore conditions. So, for example, this particular training might only lead to greater happiness for young people and have no effect for old people. That would be a moderator. But then we also might want to ask the question how the effect actually comes about. And that's what mediation is all about. So mediation is a form of path analysis where we try to look at an intermediate step. So, for example, the training might boost self-confidence, which in turn might increase happiness. In that case, self-confidence would be a mediator. Let's talk through an example from my own research, where I started from the observation that between two different types of schools, students would have very different levels of voting intention. In more disadvantaged schools, many fewer students would say that they intend to vote in the future. So for that to lead to any kind of change in the world, we need to understand why that relationship obtains and what kind of intervening factors there are. I proposed two possible factors. One of them was civic self-efficacy. Do students actually think they can make a difference? The other was civic understanding. Do they understand what's going on in the political sphere? And then we have this path model, where each of the paths can be estimated with standard linear regression techniques. And then when we have all these paths, we can describe how the effect comes about. The effect that we observed between school type and voting intentions is a direct effect, and then there are two indirect effects going through the two mediators. You don't need to understand the analysis in detail. It's to give you an idea of what mediation is about. There are a couple of conditions that need to be fulfilled for mediation to be possible. So an obvious one is we actually need to have an effect to explain. We also need the mediator to predict the outcome variable. We also need our predictor to predict the mediator, since we need that path in the model as well. And finally, we need the link between the predictor and the outcome variable to be weaker when we add a mediator into the regression model. Because otherwise there is no way that the mediator could explain a part of the effect. If all of these conditions are fulfilled, we can test whether the mediation effect is significant. However, in mediation we are making a claim about causal ordering. We're saying, well, the type of school comes first. That leads to a certain level of civic understanding, which in turn leads to voting intentions. That causal chain is something we can never establish in cross-sectional data. So in a mediation analysis of cross-sectional data, we can just establish whether that path model fits the data. So whether the data falsifies the hypothesis or not. Let's look at another more concrete example and let's look at how to actually do this in R. So when we look at the European Social Survey data, once again, we can see that people who report that foreigners live in their neighborhood report more positive attitudes towards foreigners, and we see that people who report personal contact with foreigners also report more positive attitudes. Then we might want to ask, well, is the second association actually the explanation for the first association? So, does the presence of foreigners in a neighborhood help because it leads to more personal contact? that's a question about mediation, and we can use the mediate function from the psych package to test that. That function works in a very similar way to the LM function. We need to give it a model formula and the data. And in the model formula, we need to specify which of the variables we see as the mediator by putting brackets around it. Helpfully, the first part of the output tells us whether the mediate function has passed our formula correctly by stating the dependent variable, attitude towards foreigners, the independent variable, presence of foreigners in the neighborhood, and the mediator, contact. It then reports the results both as a text and as a chart, and as often they're easiest to interpret together. So firstly, it reports the total effect. What's the total effect of the presence of foreigners on attitudes? It then reports what we tend to be most interested in, which is the indirect effect. So this is the effect that goes through the mediator. It's just the product of the effect of the predictor on the mediator and the mediator on the outcome. That's why it says AB in the output there. And finally, we also get the direct effect, which now is the part of the total effect that's not explained by the mediator. One thing to note is that for the indirect effect, mediate uses bootstrapping and therefore it just reports a confidence interval because there is no obvious statistical test for bringing these different models together. So it's one of the situations where bootstrapping occurs very frequently. As always, if the confidence interval doesn't include 0, we can conclude that the effect is significant at a conventional alpha level of 5%. So in this case, most of the effect, 0.18 out of 0.2, is explained by the mediator. There's only a very small direct effect left. So what to remember? The first thing is what mediation is about. So mediation analysis allow us to explain how an effect actually comes about. And basically, it allows us to test whether a certain variable serves as a stepping stone between the predictor and the outcome. And then we basically take apart the total effect of the predictor on the outcome and split it into a direct effect, the part that's not explained by the mediator, and an indirect effect that is explained by the mediator. In order to test mediation, we need to estimate a path model, and that path model combines basically multiple linear regression models. The easiest way to do that is to use the mediate function in the psych package, which we'll practice in class. And just in case you want to test more complicated models, you can also add multiple mediators or even a moderator to the path model estimated by the psych mediate function. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in class.